We are here to explore a functional definition of modernity that transcends simple political timelines. As we analyze the trajectory of human civilization, we must recognize that the contrasts between pre-transition societies and modern affluent states are defined by three principal categories: growth, structure, and abundance. For millennia, humanity operated within a narrow metabolic channel, constrained by the immediate flow of solar energy through agriculture. The transition we are about to dissect is not merely an increase in wealth, but a fundamental phase shift. We moved from a world where growth was imperceptible and structure was fixed by subsistence, to one defined by a sustained surge in output and a radical reconfiguration of daily existence. This presentation will dissect the mechanics of this transformation, moving from the historical stagnation of the pre-modern era to the complex, synergistic economies of the 21st century. The modern world was born from a fundamental re-engineering of the economy across three core dimensions. First, we examine growth. For most of history, economic expansion was negligible, trapped by the Malthusian limits of slow population growth and limited energy sources. The modern era is defined by the shattering of these limits. Second, we look at structure. We have witnessed a radical reshaping of human activity, moving from a monomaniacal focus on subsistence farming to a diversified hierarchy of manufacturing and services. And third, abundance. We moved from an economy of scarcity, where abundance was the privilege of a tiny elite, to the arrival of mass consumption, high mobility, and information overload. These are not separate phenomena. They are the interlocked gears of the Great Transition. As we proceed, we will analyze the specific mechanics driving each of these pillars. When we reconstruct long-term economic growth, the results are startlingly uniform across geography and time. Referencing the data from Broadberry, Madison, and others, we can conclude with high confidence that annual rates of pre-modern growth remained fractions of a percent. Between 1270 and 1663, England's annual growth was a mere 0.03%. China saw similar stagnation of roughly 0.1% annually between 1020 and 1850. In central and northern Italy, there was virtually no growth for 6 centuries. This stasis was not a failure of policy, but of physical constraint. Economies were bound by slow population growth and the reliance on traditional phytomass fuels. The curve you see represents the breakout, an epochal discontinuity where we escaped the gravitational pull of subsistence agriculture and limited prime movers. We must dismantle the simplistic thesis that the Industrial Revolution was the immediate consequence of the steam engine. As Crafts, 2014 demonstrated, steam had a minimal impact on economic growth before 1830. In fact, the revolution was a gradual acceleration. The true proximate causes were more fundamental: the agricultural revolution, which released labor from the farms, and a rise in total factor productivity, TFP, the efficiency with which inputs are converted to outputs. The typical British worker in the mid-19th century was not yet a machine operator, but a traditional craftsman. The widespread diffusion of high-pressure steam power came only after 1850. Thus, we should view the industrial takeoff not as a sudden spark from Watt's engine, but as the emergence of a society capable of sustained technological progress. Two competing yet complementary frameworks explain the British primacy. On the left, we have Robert Allen's high-wage economy thesis. Allen argues that the Industrial Revolution was invented in Britain because it paid to invent it there. A unique combination of high wages and cheap capital and coal created powerful incentives to substitute capital for labor. On the right, Joel Mokyr argues for an industrial enlightenment. He posits that a culture of useful knowledge and a transnational republic of letters lowered the cost of accessing scientific ideas. As Nicholas Crafts suggests, these are not mutually exclusive. The Enlightenment provided the intellectual foundation, while the geologic luck of coal and the economic pressure of high wages provided the kinetic spark. It was the convergence of culture and cost. The diffusion of the industrial model created the, quote, Great Divergence. By 1870, the UK and US were already accelerating away from the rest of the world. Notice the trajectories of the late starters. Japan began its transition after the Meiji Restoration in 1868, eventually converging with Western standards by the late 20th century. China, however, remained a pre-modern state, with negligible growth until the late 20th century. Between 1870 and 1950, China essentially stagnated while the West surged. It is only post-1980 that China replicated the rapid catch-up growth seen earlier in Japan. This graph confirms Allen's observation. The rich countries created the production function of the world, defining the growth possibilities that poorer countries effectively, quote, downloaded centuries later. As economies modernize, the workforce undergoes a predictable migration, modeled by French economist Jean Forestier. In the traditional civilization, over 70% of the population is locked in primary food production. Subsistence is the primary goal. As agricultural productivity rises, labor is released to the, quote, secondary sector of manufacturing, characterizing the, quote, transitional period. Finally, we arrive at the tertiary civilization, the modern affluent state. Here, automation and imports reduce manufacturing labor, and the workforce floods into services. Today, in nations like the US and UK, agriculture employs less than 2% of the workforce, and services employ over 80%. This is not merely a change in jobs, it is a total reordering of social hierarchy and daily existence. Tracing the US trajectory from 1850, we see the push and pull factors in action. In 1850, the primary sector dominated. By 1910, we reached a critical crossover point where manufacturing employment equaled agriculture. This was the peak of the industrial pull. However, look at the post-1950 acceleration. The service sector expands to consume the vast majority of the labor force, while agriculture collapses to a statistical footnote, less than 2%. This massive release of labor from the land was enabled by mechanization, a single combine harvester replacing hundreds of scythes. Today we face a new reality, deindustrialization, where manufacturing employment shrinks even as output rises, leaving the vast majority of the population in the tertiary sector. Industrialization is a multifaceted, evolving process. It is not static. Consider the aircraft industry. It began with the Wright Flyer, wood, fabric, and wax twine. By the 1930s, we moved to the aluminum monocoque construction of the DC-3. Today, the Boeing 787 represents a new material epoch where composites and carbon fiber polymers make up 50% of the plane's mass. This evolution demonstrates that while the ton share of manufacturing employment may drop, the ton value added and technical complexity continue to soar. Modern manufacturing is deeply fused with services. R&D, logistics, and software development are now intrinsic to the factory floor. We cannot judge the sector simply by the number of workers on the assembly line. The transition to modernity created an order of magnitude increase in physical throughput. In a traditional 19th century village, the total material flow was perhaps 5 to 7 tons per capita, dominated by biotic materials like wood and feed. Today, in an affluent nation, that flow is 50 to 85 tons per capita, dominated by abiotic materials, construction minerals, fossil fuels, and metals. The scale is staggering. Consider China's recent urbanization. In just 3 years, China emplaced more concrete than the United States did during the entire 20th century. This shift from renewable low-density organic flows to non-renewable high-density mineral flows is the thermodynamic signature of the modern economy. The birth of the consumer society is driven by Engel's law. As income rises, the proportion of income spent on food falls. In 1901, the average U.S. family spent nearly 80% of their income on basic necessities: food, shelter, and clothing. Survival was the primary budget item. By 2001, food expenditure collapsed to just 13%, and total necessities dropped to 50%. This gap opened the door for discretionary spending, the hallmark of modern abundance. We moved from a society of needs to a society of wants. This shift was further catalyzed by declining family sizes and rising female employment, creating a surplus of disposable income that fuels the vast market for goods and experiences we see today. For most of human history, the human orbit was defined by the distance one could walk, roughly 10 kilometers. The steam train expanded this to hundreds of kilometers. The jet airliner expanded it to tens of thousands. In thermodynamic terms, we have increased our mobility by 4 orders of magnitude. This is not just a technological feat, it is a democratization of space. In 1960, there were 69 million international tourist arrivals. By 2018, that number reached 1.4 billion. Mass mobility has transformed travel from an elite privilege into a middle-class expectation, shrinking the globe and creating a perpetually moving civilization. The final dimension of abundance is information. In 1450, the total textual information in all hand-copied libraries worldwide is estimated at roughly 100 gigabytes. Today we navigate a datasphere, measured in zettabytes. By 2016, worldwide digital storage reached 16 zettabytes. This represents an 11 order of magnitude increase, a 160 billion-fold rise. We have transitioned from a state of information scarcity, where knowledge was precious and rare, to a deluge of data. This transmission, facilitated by the optical fibers and satellite networks visualized here, has fundamentally altered cognition, governance, and social cohesion. We are no longer starving for information, we are drowning in it. We must confront the externalities of this surge. Regarding growth, we see mature economies conforming to logistic curves. Growth is slowing, suggesting we are hitting saturation points, often masked by debt-fueled stimulus. Structurally, the shift to services has led to deindustrialization and a hollowing out of the middle class, contributing to a sharp rise in inequality. The Gini coefficient in the U.S. has returned to 1920s levels. And regarding abundance, we face the price of our material throughput, over-tourism degrading destinations, the prodigious environmental impact of our energy/material intensity, and the loss of privacy in our information-saturated world. The transition has solved the problem of scarcity, only to replace it with the problems of excess and inequality. As we look to the future, the classic distinctions between Forestier's three sectors are becoming obsolete. Modern economic production is fusing these activities into inseparable synergistic wholes. High-tech agriculture is now guided by satellites and data analytics. Manufacturing is driven by software and design services. The tertiary sector is no longer just support. It is the operating system for the physical world. The journey from agrarian stasis to industrial surge is not ending. It is morphing. The future lies in this synthesis, a complex fused economy where biology, information, and industry are indistinguishable. The surge continues, but its form is changing entirely.